Aaron Tattersall here with another episode of At the Table with AgRisk Advisors, where we discuss timely and relevant issues challenging the ranchers and farmers we serve every day. You'll be hearing from industry experts and our advisors as we examine risk management programs to protect your legacy. With us today, we've got Bret Gum with AgRisk Advisors, and then also Brent Young. So we'll definitely need to enunciate very well, but I'll hand it off to Bret, and then Brent, you can go introduce yourself after Bret. So.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Like Aaron said, my name is Bret Gum. I'm an agent with AgRisk Advisors. Got started in crop insurance about 5 years ago, graduated from Kansas State University, got into crop insurance after I grew up on a farm and ranch in Kansas, and then got plugged in with AgRisk Advisors, probably 3.5 years ago, and been doing this ever since and loving it.
Awesome. And why don't you introduce yourself, Brent?
My name is Brent Young. I'm a regional extension specialist for CSU Extension. My area of specialty is agriculture and business management, and my office is here in Sterling, Colorado. Although I have responsibilities across the state of Colorado, my primary responsibilities would be that northeastern corner, roughly I-25 east and I-70 north.
Got it. Yeah, I've been at some farm shows that you've been at, Brent, and your office just puts out a ton of great information for producers, for education, and really challenging them to kind of dial in their production, their costs, and just make good, educated decisions. And so we're really honored to have you with us today. And one of our primary tenets here at AgRisk Advisors is education. We want to make sure folks know what they're getting into ahead of time, and so there are no surprises. And so, let's just kind of start talking about the Farm Bill here. This coming March 15th is the decision deadline that farmers need to make a decision on what they're going to sign up for in 2023. And of course, this current Farm Bill that we're in 2018 was reauthorized from 2014. 2014 is when the ARC and the PLC program was first introduced to us, and then those programs were reauthorized under 2018. So certainly a lot of education and scurrying up front to figure out, what mousetrap they put together and how to understand it a little bit. And now think things have smoothed out a little bit currently with the education piece. But I guess, what are you seeing, Brent, big decisions for this next sign-up deadline, considerations and such for producers?
That's certainly one benefit of the 2018 bill over 2014 is the opportunity to re-elect programs on an annual basis. 2014 bill locked us in for the duration of the Farm Bill. And so as prices and yields changed, that caused some real concerns. So producers were very active in making sure that their voices were heard in the reauthorization in 2018, and were able to push through the current system we're in now, where, as you mentioned, by March 15th, producers have the opportunity to decide which of the three programs, PLC, ARC County, or ARC Individual, that they wish to enroll in. This year, it's really a situation all about prices. Fortunately, for those of us who work with farmers and ranchers, and those of us who are farmers and ranchers, prices are at near historic highs. And so because of that, those prices are higher than the reference prices that are embedded in the Farm Bill. For both PLC and ARC County, we don't expect any payments to be made, especially in our top program crops. In Colorado, we consider our top program crops to be wheat, corn, grain, sorghum, sunflowers, and barley. And again, based on where prices are now in relationship to the reference prices that are statutory in the Farm Bill, we don't anticipate any payments to be made from either one of those programs, PLC or ARC County.
I see.
Yeah, Brent, with no payments, is that across the board for all those crops? Is there any chance of is there any more chance of a certain crop paying more than others?
I don't think it's a crop by crop basis. I think um, if you wanted to go with a one size fits all approach, probably Ark County would be a better decision. As we know, PLC is a price only program. And so, in order for a payment to be triggered, that market year average price has to be lower than the reference price in the farm bill. And we really don't think that's going to happen. And in fact, we don't want it to happen because those reference prices, as we all know, are fairly low. So it would be quite a shock to our farm economy if we triggered a PLC payment. So we really don't want to have that happen. Ark County, on the other hand, is a revenue-based product. So it's a function not only of price, that market year average, but also a county average yield. And so, um, although again, yields would have to be depressed considerably at the county level to trigger an ARC CO payment, there's probably a better chance of that than seeing our markets just collapse and get us down below those reference prices. And so maybe a slight advantage to Ark County. But again, I'm telling producers, don't expect a payment. Certainly don't build that into your cash flow or your farm budget, because chances are pretty remote that we'll see any sort of a payment for either one of those two programs.
Well, like you said, looking at ARC, we got the price aspect and the yield. Just for reference, where are we getting those county yields? Where are we getting that data from?
Well, a change a little later in the current farm bill, initially, and in the 2014 bill, those came from NASS, the National Ag Stats Service. We've changed that now, and the bulk of that data comes from RMA, Risk Management Agency, which is the agency that manages crop insurance. So most of that information, if not all of it, comes from the reports that producers submit through their insurance agent on their production. And that annual production number then goes into the calculation of their APH or approved production history. So the feeling is that the information from RMA is more exact than what we were receiving from NASS, which was based on survey data. The RMA data is actually what producers are submitting. The downside to that is we could go through that survey process in a little more timely fashion and could release those yield data a little earlier in the year. It takes a little time to compile all the RMA data, but at the end of the day, it is the more exacting data. So your county yield component in Ark County comes from the actual data that farmers submit through their crop insurance agent to RMA.
So on those yields, when are we expecting the most recent year? When do we expect those yields to come out?
Typically, those are kind of later in the year. We'll get those probably right after the first of the year, and I've seen them sometimes as late as into February. Those we try to get those posted, or the USDA tries to get them posted by late January if possible, because that actual yield data is one of the components in calculating a possible Ark County or Ark IC payment. And so, in order for the tools that we have available, online tools for producers to make an educated decision on which program, we need to have that data in place. And so, it takes some time. Usually it's kind of right at the nick of time in terms of being able to populate data in those tools so the producers can use those.
Do you will a producer's election roll over if they don't make it in? Are they absolutely required to go into the FSA office, or if they don't, will they get what they got last year?
Yeah, basically it'll roll over. They have the opportunity to make the decision by the 15th. If they don't want to do anything differently, that'll roll over. They also have the opportunity to plug in the decision for multiple years if they'd like. A few producers did that, probably a pretty small percentage, but no, if you don't make any changes, it reverts back to the decision you made for your 22 crop.
And there's an opportunity to update yields potentially at the FSA?
Not Yeah, not this time around. Typically, if we do a yield update, that happens at the beginning of a new farm bill.
I see.
And so there has been some talk about an opportunity to update yields. That's very important if you select PLC, because your payment is ultimately determined by that PLC yield that was established to that FSA farm based on the commodity that you have base acres for. There's also been some talk about maybe an opportunity to reallocate base. Now, we did both of those in the 2014 Farm Bill. Producers were able to take a look back at their history of planting, and if they wanted to, they could reallocate base between the program crops. The other thing we had the chance to do, as you mentioned, was to increase our PLC yields, again, based on primarily crop insurance data from a period of time previous to that Farm Bill. We've talked about it, but it's not been one of those issues that's really bubbled to the top, so to speak. There have been some other issues related to the Title I programs and crop insurance that seem to have been more prevalent in the discussions that I've been privy to regarding reauthorization of the Farm Bill.
Do you see those becoming more frequently in being able to update those? Because I believe before 14, correct me if I'm wrong, it'd been a long time since you're able to change base acres, change any of that.
Yeah, it's been quite some time, and I'm not for sure. I would guess it may have been late 80s, early 90s, one of those farm bills. But you're exactly right. It had been quite some time. And certainly one of the arguments for increasing the PLC yields was that, technology's improved, our varieties have improved. We just needed to look at that. And same thing with base acres. Again, I think the last time there was an opportunity to reallocate base would have been early 90s, late 80s, so it had been quite some time. And, our over time market conditions had changed. World production of crops had changed. And one of the things we saw with reallocation in 2014 is we saw a real shift of base acres out of wheat and into corn and soybeans. And that just reflected really what was happening in the market and what was happening with domestic production of those three crops.
Yeah, I could see that being a big deal going forward. I mean, especially on corn. I mean, 2014 being able to update those yields then, but even since then, I mean, corn, it just we're getting better genetics every year.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things we have to consider when we do something like that is it costs money. And so we're always concerned about, what's that base level funding that the CBO is locking or try to lock in for that farm bill. And so anything that we do that modifies, especially Title I programs and Title 11 crop insurance, can have a pretty substantial effect on what that budget happens. Really, the one issue that seems to be more at the forefront relating to the Title I commodity support programs, more so than either base reallocation or increasing PLC yields, is increasing those reference prices that are embedded in the farm bill. For example, the reference price for corn is $3.70, for wheat is $5.50. And a lot of people are concerned that, first of all, those are quite a ways below cost of production. And then that's primarily the reason we haven't seen much of a support in those Title I programs, because those reference prices are so much lower than what market prices are currently at. I've had some people liken it to, we consider Title I to be a part of our safety net. Well, if you look at those reference prices today and you look at cost of production and you look at where markets are, we still have a safety net, but you've got to fall a long way before you hit that net. And so there could be a little bruising once you finally do that. And the idea is, let's move that safety net a little closer to cost of production and also where markets are, to reduce the length of the fall, so to speak. But again, that costs money. And so that figures into trying to come in with a farm bill that hits those budget targets.
So there's some other options, aren't there, Brett, as it comes with federal crop insurance, if through some of this SCO and if ARC or PLC aren't going to trigger anything?
Yeah, there are, Aaron, and especially when we're in those cases where PLC and ARC, the chances of them paying are pretty low. There's actually kind of the crop insurance version of ARC, and that's called SCO. And so what SCO is called supplemental coverage option. And it's still looking at those county yields, and we're actually able to insure up to 86% of the average county yield. And we're going to fill that gap between that 86% down to whatever your coverage level is. So if you have a 75% coverage level, we're going to cover 75% to 86%. And in that gap, we're going to look at those county yields. But because it's a county program, we're not looking at just your yields. It's a good way to add extra coverage for significantly cheaper, because if you were trying to get up to, let's say, 85% on your crop insurance, you can do that, but you're going to pay an arm and leg for it. And in most cases, especially in Colorado, it's just not economical to do so. And so with the SEO, there's also the ECO. That's going to basically cover you between 95% to that 86%. And so that's another one that came out probably a couple years ago. Again, just giving you extra coverage based on the county level. That one's a little bit more expensive, but we have been seeing that grow. But both of those options, especially if PLC and ARC are not going to pay, crop insurance, you got to pay for this program, but it's still significantly cheaper. And if you're looking to add extra coverage, and with ARC and PLC not paying, it can be definitely a good option for you.
You make those elections, SCO or ECO on that application, that crop insurance application.
You do, yeah. And so you have to make it by March 15th on your crop insurance application. And to be eligible, you have to select PLC at the FSA. If you select ARC, you're not eligible. So with that, though, if you're selecting PLC, probably not going to pay, but you still have it. And then you can select SCO, which is, like I said, the crop insurance version of ARC. So in that way, you can kind of get a 2-for-1 by going that route.
Well, we're throwing around a lot of acronyms and numbers and prices. Brent, what resources do you use to kind of filter through all this? Do you have any advice on where folks can go to look at some calculators and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two primary calculators that have been with us throughout both the 2014 and the 2018 Farm Bill. And actually, there was a process whereby primarily universities submitted plans to develop these calculators, and there were some funding built into the 2014 bill to develop and maintain those calculators. So the two universities that won those grants initially were the University of Illinois, and they have two tools. They have a pretty simple tool that actually is cell phone, smartphone applicable. And that one does a fair job with corn, soybeans, and wheat. Now, I'll tell producers in Colorado, it's a good program for corn for us. The problem with it in wheat is it is, based in Illinois, so it doesn't do a good job, in my estimation, of the fact that we have some counties that have both an irrigated yield and a non-irrigated yield. So if you want a quick snapshot with corn, that one works pretty well. The other university that received funding was Texas A&M University, and they have a little bit more detailed tool that does all of the commodities. I think it does a pretty fair job on all of those, and so that's another one that's pretty simple. If a producer is looking at making an ARC individual or an ARC IC decision, that gets a little bit more complex, because you've got to input information from your prior 5 years in terms of yield, and it's a specific 5-year look back period. And so those tools are more sophisticated. Also, if you are looking at, you've got multiple FSA farms and you're looking at considering enrolling multiple farms in ARC IC, the Farm Bill has a provision that we call it the bucket effect. And so if you have multiple farms in ARC IC, enrolled in ARC IC, it's not a payment based on what the merit of each individual farm would be, but kind of a blending factor. And so those tools are built to take that into account. I've had some issues with the University of Illinois tool this year for ArcIC. I think there's a few bugs in it. It is, as compared to the tool from Texas A&M University, it is the easiest to use because it embeds all of this tremendous amount of information. It's just
Mm.
tons of information from every state in the union, every county within that state, and all the program crops and all the data. So it's a very sophisticated tool, but there are some issues I think on updating it. The Texas A&M tool uh, requires you to actually hand enter some information. Now, that information is either available on the tool itself or it's available at the FSA ARC PLC website. So it's a tool that requires a little bit more work on the producer side, but I think we're getting a little bit accurate information utilizing those tools. The Both of those tools are accessible on the FSA ARC PLC website. When I want to go to that site, I just Google or whatever search engine I happen to use that day, FSA ARC PLC, and it's usually the first hit that'll come up. And then there's a tab on that for program resources that'll take you right to the websites for those tools. Also, I found a very simple, again, Google search of University of Illinois ARC PLC or TAMU for Texas A&M University ARC PLC will also take me to those websites. So they're fairly easy to find. They do have very complete instructions. If you can read and follow the instructions, you should be able to make the tools work for you.
I'm glad you brought up ArcIC. I think in the past few years that hasn't been much of a discussion, but it seems like at least this year and maybe a little bit of last year, that's came up a little bit more. What do you see as far as a broad spectrum? What's kind of that decision point that you say maybe ArcIC is going to work a little bit better for you in this farm versus another one?
It's a good question, and it's really a program I promoted for the last probably 3 years, and we've actually seen the number of acres enrolled in ArcIC, at least in the northeastern part of Colorado, increase significantly over the last couple of years. Just a little bit of background. In the negotiations of the 2014 Farm Bill, a lot of producer groups were able to really get the ear of Congress and talk about here are the things we really need, and especially a group of wheat producers through their commodity organizations in Montana said, we really need ArcIC because Montana is a big state. They have very big counties. And so trying to put together a program that utilizes county yields could be a problem. If you have a very large county, an individual farmer's yields may vary greatly from the county average just because of that large geographic area. So that's what ArcIC was meant to do. So it's really a program for those producers whose yields are either much better than their county average or much lower than the county average, or because conditions are such they expect their own yields to be lower during that program year. And so I have really encouraged dryland producers, especially winter wheat producers, to look very hard at ArcIC as a potential program for them. An advantage a winter wheat producer has over other producers is they've planted that winter wheat in the fall, and our sign up period is March 15th. And so they actually have an opportunity before they sign up to go out, look around, dig around a little bit, and get an idea of what the condition of that wheat crop is and what their potential yields might be before they sign up. And I've got a number of producers I've been talking with in southeastern Colorado who've done that very thing. They've gone out and looked. They noticed that they had quite a bit of blowout. They've had some winter kill. They planted, in dust in most cases last fall. And so they've got a pretty poor stand. And so if we run that ArcIC calculator on their farm and we plug in, some pretty low yields, potential low yields because of crop loss, even with those high market year average prices we're expecting, many of those calculators are showing that they may generate a payment. And so I think it's a program that's especially helpful for again, dryland wheat producers, because they have the opportunity, unlike a spring planted crop, to go out before sign up day and really look at the conditions and have a pretty good idea of what that crop's going to do. We've also seen some, increased interest in spring planted dryland crops, primarily corn and grain sorghum, kind of for the same reason. If you go out in March and you dig around and the soil profile is pretty dry, then there's maybe a pretty good chance that even if we're able to plant a crop of sorghum or dryland corn, we're going to have some yield decreases. So I think especially for a dryland producer, it's something to look at. On the other side, I've worked with some corn producers in certain counties here in northeastern Colorado that have significantly higher um, yields than the county average, and they've been able to make ARC IC work as well. So I think if you're in either one of those circumstances, before you sign up, it's well worth your time to go through and utilize one of the decision tools for ARC IC and just take a look and see if it might work out for you.
Yeah, those are great points. I think a lot of my insureds that I work with, they're definitely going to be considering ARC IC, and I expect quite a few to select that. Brent, going into, we're coming up on a farm bill here. What are you kind of seeing in these listening discussions? What can we kind of expect going forward, when they come out with this farm bill? Any changes or anything like that?
Sure. So from the farmer side, and I've attended probably 3 or 4 of these, primarily the ones that have been promoted and organized through Senator Bennett's office. It seems the farmers have 2 things on their mind. Number one is we need to improve those reference prices. And we've had some pretty lively discussion around that point. We'll have the people from Senator Bennett's office that certainly understand how the Farm Bill is put together and some of the restrictions we have based on our budget. And we'll say, if we do that, it breaks the budget. Well, the farmers come back and say, well, that's not realistic for today. And you need to take into account an inflation factor. And if we move that safety net up where it's a little closer to cost of production and current market prices, it may or may not be a budget buster because it still may not trigger. We know for sure where they are now in current conditions, they won't. And so that was probably the number one discussion. The second one relates to Title 11 crop insurance. And what I'm hearing from most producers is leave it alone. We're very happy with it. The level of subsidy is important for us to be able to afford crop insurance. It's something that most of us, plug into our budget. We're willing to purchase it given the levels of support we have now for the program. So let's don't change it. So those are the things I'm hearing from farmers. Now, there are a lot of people obviously who are involved and interested in what happens in the farm bill that aren't farmers and ranchers. And from those folks, we tend to start hearing more about the conservation titles. What can we do there? Maybe to incentivize more CRP sign up. There's a high level of interest in promoting production techniques that will sequester carbon or are climate smart. How do we do those? Initially, I was concerned personally because I'd heard that, there was some thought about rather than using the carrot to encourage farmers and ranchers to adopt climate smart practices, we might have more of a stick. In order for you to qualify for crop insurance, you had to do certain things, or maybe your ARC PLC payment would be determined by your compliance in certain areas. It seems like that's kind of cooled down, and it's more of this incentive program. How can we incentivize those practices that we can prove are climate smart practices? So that's in general what I've heard in terms of kind of the interest in any possible changes coming up in the new bill.
Yeah, and is there any? I mean, for everybody listening, crop insurance is a big part of agriculture in today's world, in the U.S. Is there anything that they can do to show their support to make sure that we are going to get this farm bill through? Because as many as people that are for crop insurance, we have plenty of opponents too. Is there anything that farmers can do to show their support for it?
I always encourage that that you keep abreast of what's happening in the negotiations. It's very important that you know what's going on, certainly through uh, agricultural media and through your farm organizations. Usually they do a good job of keeping us abreast of how things are progressing. So just keep an eye on it. Be prepared to, make phone calls, write letters. If there is a comment period for, something that you're passionate about, spend some time and make a comment. Typically you can do all of those online, so it's a relatively straightforward process. The other thing I think always have to be concerned about with crop insurance is obviously it's part of the farm bill. We want to make sure that it's left intact. We have a program that works for farmers in the farm bill. But the other thing we have to always watch are presidential budgets, because it's crop insurance is low hanging fruit. And if a presidential administration wants to, and Congress the same way, if they want to score points with their constituents in some effort to reduce our budget, the idea is, well, we can get rid of crop insurance subsidies because, first of all, they only affect a very small part of our population, and the general population doesn't understand the importance. So I guess the bottom line for me with producers is just be very vigilant and be sure that you're willing to make people known, people understand in our federal government how important crop insurance is to you and your operation. I think the other thing that sometimes we fail to say is, in some cases it's a necessity for obtaining credit. In order to get an operating note, you need to have some level of crop insurance. So that's the other shoe that falls as we dilute the crop insurance program, is it makes it more difficult for farmers to access credit. And so I think that's the other important point that we need to talk about as it relates to crop insurance. And then finally, another point that a lot of people don't realize, crop insurance is a vital component of a really sound marketing plan. I encourage producers to always look for opportunities to pre-harvest price commodities. And the only way that you can do that with assurance that if something happens and you lose a crop, that you're able to make those contracts whole, is through crop insurance. So if we lose that crop insurance or ability to purchase crop insurance, it also has some rather significant ramifications on our ability to effectively market our crops.
Those are great points, Brent. And we're coming up on toward the end of our little session here. And I think just echoing what you're saying, the importance of these programs, especially with operators and our nation's food supply, and keeping that secure. Efforts like this that we're doing to get the word out and keep folks abreast of the opportunities are important. So we're really excited, Brent, to do some more talks with you. I know you've got a lot of great programs and want to get the education out. So we'll definitely be circling back. And if anyone has any questions, Brent, maybe give you your contact information. I don't know if we've done that yet, and then we'll wrap up here.
Yeah, if I can be of help to anyone, please let me know. I'm going to give you a cell phone number. This is a CSU owned cell phone, so feel free to use it. That number is 970-580-2204. And then probably the most efficient way to contact me is via email. My email address is all lowercase, Brent, BRENT, .young, YOUNG, at Colostate, COLOSTATE.edu. Either method will work, or you can simply Google me, Brent Young CSU, and you should be able to find all that information.
You bet. And then our information's on the agriskadvisors.com website. And again, thank you so much for taking the time, Brent, and we'll see you down the road, and happy trails.